Our story begins in 16th century Spain. A spirit of reform permeated society. The Spanish were beginning to set out to explore and conquer the New World. Likewise, the Spanish Church was entering one of its most dynamic epochs. On March 28, 1515, a girl named Teresa Ahumada was born in Avila. She was reared in a religious home and grew to inherit the piety of her parents. Once, at the age of 7, she persuaded her brother Rodrigo to join her on a trip to the land of the Moors to be beheaded for the love of God. They escaped their home only to run into their uncle on the road. They were returned to their anxious parents. It was perhaps inevitable that she would choose a life spent in the service of the Lord. 6 years later, in 1521, Ferdinand Magellan's fleet docked at the island of Limasaua, which is now a municipality in southern Leyte. With him were several secular priests who said the first Mass on Easter Sunday. Some of the early Filipinos agreed to conversion. However, the priest's mission was cut short when Magellan and some of the company were killed by Lapu-Lapu and his warriors. The survivors had no choice but to sail back to Spain. When Teresa was 20 years old, she entered the Carmelite monastery of the Encarnacion. By 1562, she began to think about establishing Carmelite houses wherein the order's primitive rule could be lived. She initiated a reform, founding the Discalced Carmelites. She hoped to return to the order's primitive roots. Meanwhile, in 1565, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi was tasked to accomplish what Magellan and Ruy Lopez de Villalobos could not: unite the islands that would come to be known as the Philippines under the Spanish crown. Back in Avila, Teresa received permission to establish the convent of San Jose in 1562. It was within these walls that her reforms began in earnest. She felt called to a return to the primitive rule that Saint Albert had written in the 13th century. Such a life required a simplicity that was absent from the Carmelite order of Teresa's time, as well as a stronger emphasis on silence and contemplation. The nuns were instructed in silent prayer and meditation and were entreated to live a life of solitude and contemplation. Across the ocean, Legazpi reached the Visayas and met with a chief of Bohol, si Catuna, with whom he entered a blood compact. He and his crew then explored some nearby islands, among them Cebu, Negros, and Panay. Accompanying him was Fray Andres de Urdaneta, who formally established the presence of the Catholic Church in the Philippines. He and his fellow priests tirelessly worked toward the conversion of the early Filipinos. By 1571, they had instituted the first Spanish city and diocese in the Philippines, Cebu. Over the next several years, Santa Teresa would establish 17 convents and 2 monasteries for friars throughout Spain. She would also pen an impressive body of written works, including the interior castle, an autobiography detailing her experience of God through contemplation. She died at the age of 67 on October 15, 1582. She was canonized on March 12, 1622 and was declared a doctor of the Church on September 27, 1970. She was the first woman to be honored with that distinction. With her civilizing mission thriving in the Visayas, Legazpi and his cohort set their eyes upon Luzon and Mindanao. This proved to be a more difficult endeavor. Eventually, they prevailed, and Maynila fell to the Spanish in 1571. It was renamed Manila and was named the capital of the Spanish Philippines. More friars, priests, and other Spanish religious soon arrived to evangelize. Thus, the Philippines became and remains the predominant Christian nation in Asia. The first image of Our Lady of Mount Carmel reached the Philippines in 1618. The Discalced Carmelites in Mexico had gifted it to the Augustinian Recollects as a gesture of brotherhood. The Augustinians in turn brought it with them to Manila and is now at the minor Basilica of San Sebastian in Quiapo, Manila. The Augustinian Recollects continued to propagate the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel and the brown scapular. One of the fruits of this evangelization is the building of the historic Barasoain Church, also known as Our Lady of Mount Carmel Parish. 100 years ago in November 1923, the Discalced Carmelite nuns finally reached the shores of the Philippines, establishing a convent in Haro, Iloilo. The friars arrived later in Quezon Province in 1947. Together, they shared the Carmelite spirituality with the laity by organizing tertiary groups, later formally included as an integral part of the order as the Secular Order of Discalced Carmelites. The presence of the Carmelites and the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel and the brown scapular are visible through the National Shrine of Our Lady of Mount Carmel along Broadway Avenue in Quezon City, where the image of Our Lady of Mount Carmel was canonically crowned on August 15, 2020. 5 centuries after Santa Teresa and the Spanish conquest of the Philippines, the Catholic Church has inevitably gone through many changes. But one thing remains the same: its mission to share the truth of God's love and His message of salvation. Today, the mission of Teresian Carmel in the Church is to live and bear witness to our call to intimate friendship with God. We are called to proclaim what we have seen and heard, accompanying people on the journey of their interior life, so that all may have the experience of being loved by the God who dwells within us and calls us to respond to His love. Both Santa Teresa and Fray Urdaneta set themselves on missions. Santa Teresa focused on the interior life of prayer and contemplation, around which the Discalced Carmelites built and continue to build their way of life. On the other hand, Fray Urdaneta's task was the evangelization of the early Filipinos, a mission to which all members of the Church, most especially the clergy, are committed to.